The corridors of the hive world were endless, stretching like a labyrinth of stone, steel, and fire, echoing with the distant rumble of manufacturing engines. In this ceaseless thrum, life and death were measured not in years but in duty, in survival, in devotion. Yet even amid the grinding monotony of servitor-guided labor and the pious hum of chanters, there were whispers, tales carried on the winds of the underhive and whispered in the shadows of forgotten altars. These were not whispers of loyalty to Terra, nor of the Emperor's mercy. They spoke instead of power that could shatter the mortal coil, of gifts from entities older than the stars, whose names were spoken in fear and awe across the galaxy. Mortal souls, bound by flesh yet burning with ambition, could sense the pull even before they understood it. For some, the first stirrings came on battlefields thick with promethium fire, where the air itself tasted of iron and ash. For others, the call emerged quietly in the silence of the library vaults, where forbidden codices hinted at truths mortals were not meant to grasp. These are the ones who would seek the favor of the chaos gods, their hearts ignited by hunger, their minds sharpened by obsession. They were not heroes in the conventional sense. They were mortals who felt themselves inadequate, yet unrelenting, unwilling to accept the simple fate of death and oblivion. The first step toward ascension is subtle, almost imperceptible. A voice whispers in dreams, a presence pricks the mind in moments of despair. Mortals speak of visions of stars bleeding into the void, of shadowed forms that promise power beyond comprehension, and of a path lined with fire and devotion. The mortal mind, fragile and ambitious, begins to answer in kind. Small victories emerge first, uncanny luck on the battlefield, a sudden insight that bends events in their favor, the unexplainable sway over those around them. Each sign is intoxicating, each success a confirmation that the gods, or at least their emissaries, have noticed them. Hunger grows alongside these gifts, and with it, the first fractures of humanity. Yet desire alone is not enough. Ascension demands payment, and the currency is the essence of the self. Families vanish, alliances crumble, regiments march to slaughter to feed the dark favor. Every act of cruelty, cunning, or sacrifice fuels the latent potential of the aspirant. Each choice, each transgression, is both test and offering. Those who stumble too far, who waver in conviction, vanish quietly into the immaterium, leaving behind only the faint echo of ambition unmet. The path is not gentle, nor forgiving, and only the most unyielding souls endure its initial trials. Among the most notorious of these aspirants are the warlords of shattered worlds. They have lived through firestorms and planetary sieges, their hands coated in the ash of fallen empires. Even they, steeped in mortal brutality, feel the pull of ascension. For them, it is inevitability more than ambition. Each victory, each conquest, feeds the whispered promises of the gods. They are taught to embrace fear, to revel in power, to twist the morality of men into tools of devotion. Slowly, painfully, they learn that humanity is a chain, and their salvation lies in breaking it. But not all seekers are warriors. Some are psychers, scribes, or scholars, those whose weapons are not bolter or blade but insight and knowledge. They move through labyrinthine libraries or abandoned mechanicus vaults, reading the patterns of the warp and forbidden texts, feeling the currents of the immaterium tugging at their consciousness. For them, ascension is understanding made tangible, the ultimate mastery of fate and power. Yet even intellect offers no protection from the demands of the gods. Doubt is a poison, hesitation a fatal flaw. The mind must fracture and rebuild, accepting the impossible as truth and surrendering to the incomprehensible while retaining the spark of ambition strong enough to survive. In the shadow of all this, one truth endures: the path to ascension is perilous, a knife edge between triumph and oblivion. Every choice matters, every act of devotion or defiance is a step toward transformation or annihilation. The mortal who pursues this path becomes both predator and prey, shaped by fire, blood, and the dark guidance of unseen gods. To watch such a soul is to feel the tension of the galaxy itself, waiting, watching, knowing that what will emerge from this mortal is either something monstrous or something divine. The nights on hive worlds are not silent. They carry the whispers of the forgotten, the echo of those who once dared to seek what they could not yet understand. Aspirants tread these shadows, moving between the teeming underhives and the cavernous manufactorums above, where the scent of burning promethium and lubricants hangs thick in the air. Every footstep, every breath is a rehearsal for the transformation they covet. Their bodies remain human, but their minds already carry the weight of something older, something that belongs not to the material realm but to the vast, roiling expanse of the warp. They walk with purpose, a dangerous clarity, sensing the currents of fate shift subtly in their favor, or at least in ways that test their cunning and resolve. Each aspirant develops a private ritual, a liturgy unknown to the rest of the Imperium. Some pray to faceless idols hidden in ruined sanctuaries, offering blood, sweat, and bone to forces that cannot be seen by mortal eyes. Others inscribe sigils upon their flesh, burn them with fire, and let the pain guide their thoughts toward the godly whispers they have learned to trust. It is not only devotion that matters, but the intensity of sacrifice. The chaos gods measure not intention but consequence, weighing the mortals' suffering, their ambition, and their capacity for cruelty. Only the most resolute are noticed, their souls marking themselves in patterns invisible to human eyes but radiant to entities who exist outside reality. The transformation begins quietly, in subtle ways. A soldier finds their reflexes unnaturally sharp, their perception heightened beyond mortal limits. A scholar's mind becomes a conduit for knowledge that should have been forbidden, their thoughts echoing with insights no human mind could sustain. Even as these gifts manifest, the aspirant feels a cost, an itch in the soul, a tightening in the chest, the slow erosion of empathy and fear. They are reminded daily that they are no longer meant to remain human. Every fleeting glance of compassion, every hesitation to strike, is a temptation that must be resisted. The aspirant learns that morality is a cage, and freedom is forged in the flames of self-denial. Not all who walk this path survive the first trials. Many are consumed by the hunger they sought to feed. There are tales of psychers who, seduced by visions of power, attempted to channel energies beyond their control, only to have their bodies twisted into nightmarish shapes, their minds flayed by the warp itself. Soldiers who craved dominion over life and death were sometimes swallowed whole by the tide of chaos, leaving behind only charred armor and the faintest echo of their ambition. These failures serve as warnings, whispered among those who remain, that the favor of the gods is as dangerous as it is desirable, and the line between ascension and annihilation is finer than a whisper on a storm. Even for those who endure, the cost is never fully repaid. Every victory, every conquest, every unholy pact chips away at the remnants of the mortal self. Aspirants may still walk among men, speak to humans, even command them in battle, but the truth is that they are already shadows of something greater, or something monstrous. Their dreams are no longer their own, filled instead with visions of alien geometries, starless voids, and the laughter of unseen patrons. And yet, in this creeping alienation, there is ecstasy. They feel the pull of eternity, the promise of power that defies decay and death, and the assurance that, if they endure, they will never be ordinary again. As the first part of the journey ends, the aspirant faces the ultimate challenge of this stage, choosing the path forward with full knowledge of the cost. Do they continue to feed the dark whisperings, surrendering the last fragments of humanity to the service of something greater? Or do they retreat, returning to the safety of mortal life, forever haunted by what might have been? Most do not choose, they are chosen, in ways imperceptible, by forces that exist beyond comprehension. The mortal is pulled forward, inexorably, toward trials that will test not only their strength and ambition but their very soul. And so, they march into the unknown, carrying with them the hope, the hunger, and the terror of what is to come. The shadows of the hive grow deeper with each passing day, and somewhere beyond the material world, entities older than the stars watch, waiting. They measure, they whisper, they tempt. And the mortal who seeks ascension, who walks with ambition burning brighter than the light of a million suns, is already on the threshold of a transformation that will unmake everything they once were. The final days of mortal preparation are marked by silence and obsession. Aspirants withdraw from the world, leaving behind even the faintest ties that bind them to humanity. Friends and family are neglected, alliances severed, and in the underhive, whispers begin to follow them, voices speaking of destinies too vast for human comprehension, of power that will burn through flesh and mind alike. It is a solitude both crushing and liberating, for in isolation, the aspirant comes to know themselves as they will soon be known by the gods, a vessel for something eternal, a conduit of the warp's unrelenting fury. Their reflection in cracked data slates is no longer recognizable, for ambition has etched lines of hunger and obsession into every contour of their face, every gesture, every breath. Even as they prepare, the aspirants are haunted by dreams of the immaterium, fragments of visions glimpsed through the thin veil of reality. Fires that burn without heat, cities that collapse upon themselves into infinite loops of stone and shadow, and the forms of the gods themselves, each one vast, incomprehensible, and dripping with the weight of timelessness. Some claim these dreams are warnings, others affirm they are invitations. Yet the aspirants know that neither warning nor invitation offers safety. The path to ascension is neither clear nor forgiving. To hesitate is to die, to fail is to be devoured utterly. And in the quietest hours, when no sound reaches the ears but the beating of their own heart, they wonder whether this hunger, this obsession, will ever truly be sated. The acts of devotion escalate. Aspirants conduct rituals that would make a seasoned imperial inquisitor recoil, sacrifices upon hidden altars, arcane incantations drawn from forbidden tomes, and the deliberate courting of misfortune to prove resilience and worth. Each act is a test, each act a measurement of alignment with the will of the chaos gods. Failure is never accidental, it is the inevitable cost of weakness, of hesitation, of lingering humanity. And yet, the aspirant continues, driven by visions of power that promise dominion over life, death, and even fate itself. It is a drive that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with, it is the very marrow of ambition, distilled and sharpened into a blade that pierces every doubt and fear. It is during these final trials that some aspirants first sense the transformative touch of the warp. A subtle change in perception, colors richer than reality allows, sounds that resonate in ways both terrifying and beautiful, a taste of divinity on the tongue that is both intoxicating and poisonous. Those attuned to these shifts report a feeling of expansion, as though their consciousness has begun to spill beyond the confines of the body. Others experience terror instead, hallucinations of writhing forms, the impossible weight of unseen eyes upon their minds, whispers in languages that should not exist. All are signs that the gods are taking notice, measuring the aspirant, drawing them closer to the precipice. And some, those unready or unwilling to surrender fully, are lost at this stage, devoured by the very powers they sought to command. By the end of this phase, the mortal is no longer entirely mortal. They are something in between, a threshold being standing at the edge of possibility. Their body may still bleed, sweat, and age, but their soul has begun its transformation, woven into the intricate web of favor and power spun by the gods themselves. In the quiet moments, when all is still and the underhive breathes around them, they feel the enormity of what is to come. The path to demonhood stretches before them, vast and infinite, marked with fire and shadow, temptation and trial. And yet, despite the danger, the loss, and the creeping erosion of what they once were, they cannot, will not, turn back. The mortal stands on the threshold, and beyond it lies the first step into true power. Here, ambition and terror merge, and the whispers of the gods are no longer distant but intimate, guiding and testing in equal measure. The journey from flesh to demon is imminent, and the hive world seems to hold its breath as if it too recognizes the significance of the moment. It is the beginning of a transformation that will echo through eternity, for some will rise and become the demon princes whose names are feared in every corner of the galaxy, while others will be swallowed, leaving only whispers and ash behind. The rituals of ascension are not written in any codex sanctioned by the Adeptus Mechanicus, nor can they be fully described in the liturgies of the ecclesiarchy. They exist in the spaces between reality and myth, whispered among heretical cults and glimpsed in the dreams of those who have touched the immaterium and survived. These rites are not merely ceremonies, they are crucibles, forged to test the mortal, strip away the remnants of humanity, and shape the soul into a vessel capable of withstanding the touch of a god. To partake in them is to walk a path lined with fire, blood, and suffering, where failure is absolute and mercy does not exist. In the hidden sanctuaries of forgotten worlds, aspirants kneel upon cracked stone altars, their flesh inscribed with sigils that burn with unholy light. The air is thick with incense, or sometimes with the metallic tang of blood, for every rite demands sacrifice. It is said that the gods do not simply take what they are offered, they reshape it, distill it, and return it transformed. The mortal, too, is reshaped in the process. Pain is not incidental, it is essential. Each scar, each cut, each deliberate torment serves as a conduit, allowing the power of the chaos gods to seep into bone, muscle, and soul. Some report the sensation as fire that does not consume, a cold that pierces deeper than steel, or voices that echo inside the skull long after the ritual ends. The rituals vary according to the patron deity, yet all share common threads. The aspirant must confront the parts of themselves they most fear: doubt, guilt, regret. Some are forced to witness the slaughter of those they once loved, the destruction of communities they once defended. Others are submerged in stasis, their minds adrift in the immaterium, forced to face endless visions of torment and ecstasy intertwined. Time stretches and contracts, leaving the mortal unsure of what is real and what is a dream of the warp. It is in these moments that the gods test resolve, measuring the will to ascend against the instinct for self-preservation. Only the strongest, those who embrace both the agony and the promise, survive the ordeal. The preparatory rites are meticulous. Every action is deliberate, every chant precise, for the slightest misstep can unravel years of devotion and ambition. Aspirants spend days, sometimes weeks, in ritual purification, stripping themselves of mortal distractions, prayers to the emperor, loyalty to comrades, even fleeting thoughts of mercy or doubt. Some bind themselves to idols of their chosen patron, offering symbolic devotion through blood or fire. Others consume substances designed to heighten perception, drawing the senses closer to the warp, where the god's touch can be felt with terrifying intimacy. It is not a path for the faint-hearted, nor for those who cling to hope of earthly comfort. Each step must be taken with full awareness of the price. As the rituals progress, physical transformation begins, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Veins darken with ichor, eyes gleam with unnatural light, and muscles tense with newfound strength. Some find that their senses have sharpened beyond mortal capacity, they hear the heartbeat of distant creatures, feel the subtle vibrations of Promethean fires, sense the flow of life and death around them. The mind, too, begins to change. Thoughts become sharper, more focused, yet tinged with an alien awareness. Dreams are filled with impossible geometries, glimpses of entities older than stars, and whispers that promise dominion over the galaxy. The mortal begins to feel the weight of something far greater pressing upon them, a presence both alluring and terrifying. Even as these transformations occur, the aspirant is never alone. Demonic patrons, emissaries of the gods, hover at the edge of perception, testing, guiding, threatening. Some take forms that inspire awe, others that inspire pure horror, shapes with too many limbs, eyes that see every secret, voices that speak of inevitability and power in the same breath. Interaction with these beings is a trial in itself. To falter in thought or speech risks being consumed, erased from reality entirely. To succeed is to draw the attention of a patron, to earn the favor that can eventually lead to ascension. And for those who succeed, the path does not end, it merely begins, deeper, darker, and more demanding than before. The rituals of ascension are as much an unmaking as they are a forging. Mortality must be shed like a carcass, doubt must be burned away, desire must be honed into a weapon. Every act, every sensation, every suffering endured shapes the aspirant into something both alien and divine. By the time the mortal completes even the first stage of ritual, they are no longer fully human. Their body may still appear familiar, but their soul has begun its transformation, woven into the intricate tapestry of power and corruption that only the chaos gods can spin. The deeper the aspirant ventures into ritual, the more the boundary between mortal and immortal begins to dissolve. Days lose meaning, measured not by hours but by suffering endured and endurance tested. In the inner sanctums of the hidden cults, the air is thick with the stench of incense, burnt flesh, and the subtle tang of the immaterium bleeding into reality. Aspirants find themselves forced into acts that would chill even a hardened veteran of the Astra Militarum, sacrifices that are both literal and symbolic, confrontations with the darkest recesses of the psyche, and ceremonies where the very laws of reality are bent to witness the mortal's worthiness. Each ritual is designed not to teach, but to strip away everything that anchors them to humanity, leaving only the potential for godhood. Pain is both currency and crucible. Flesh is cut, scarred, and branded with sigils that glow faintly with unholy light. Some aspirants are submerged in pools of ichor or molten alloys, their bodies teetering between burning and freezing, feeling life itself bend and twist around them. The body is a canvas, the soul the brush, and the chaos gods the artists. Yet it is never purely physical. The mind is tested relentlessly, visions of betrayal, of war, of infinite suffering that stretch beyond comprehension, assail the senses. Memory is both weapon and burden. The aspirant must face every failure, every fleeting shred of compassion, every hesitation that once defined them. Only by embracing these weaknesses as instruments of power can they hope to pass. The rituals also demand obedience, though not in the mortal sense. The chaos gods do not command in tones the human mind easily grasps. Their instructions are cryptic, often contradictory, delivered in visions, dreams, or whispers that fold reality upon itself. Aspirants learn to interpret these signs, to act with precision and instinct, knowing that missteps are fatal. Every choice must balance ambition with patience, cruelty with subtlety, devotion with cunning. And when the mortal falters, there is no reprieve, the immaterium is a patient judge, and failure can lead to complete annihilation of body and soul. Some aspirants report communion with entities that hover between demon and god, beings whose forms defy geometry and whose voices warp the mind. These encounters are both terrifying and intoxicating. A single glance can imbue the mortal with knowledge beyond mortal comprehension, or drive them to madness. A whisper can guide a ritual to success, or turn it into a death trap. To endure these encounters requires more than courage. It requires the willingness to surrender the self entirely while retaining the spark of ambition strong enough to survive. It is a delicate, terrifying balance, and one that few mortals maintain long without succumbing to the abyss. With each completed rite, the mortal feels the tangible pull of transformation. Their senses become attuned to the rhythms of the warp, their perception of the galaxy, once limited to flesh and steel, expands into patterns of power and corruption. They hear the faint resonance of life and death across worlds, feel the tug of promethium fires and psychic currents, and sense the presence of other beings who have walked this path before them, those who succeeded, and those who failed. This new awareness is exhilarating, but it carries the weight of isolation. The mortal is now set apart from humanity, a creature on the threshold of something terrible and magnificent. Yet the most dangerous aspect of the rituals is the seduction of the self. As the aspirant becomes more attuned to the warp, their sense of morality, identity, and reality begins to blur. They feel the intoxicating potential of power, the thrill of mastery over life and death, and the promise that they could command the destiny of stars. The human part of them recoils even as ambition drives them forward. The conflict between old instincts and new purpose is constant, a tension that can fracture the mind if not mastered. Those who falter are often consumed, not destroyed, but remade into twisted forms, servants to the very gods they sought to emulate. By the conclusion of these trials, the aspirant is ready to step fully into the warp, leaving the safety of the material realm behind. Their body bears the scars and symbols of devotion, their mind has begun to stretch into the incomprehensible, and their soul is prepared to undergo the final crucible that will either elevate them into the ranks of demon princes or erase them entirely. The rituals have done their work, humanity has been stripped, ambition sharpened, and the mortal is now primed to face the vast, unknowable currents of the immaterium itself. The path ahead is no longer one of preparation, but of survival, dominance, and transformation beyond comprehension. As the mortal crosses the final threshold of ritual, the atmosphere itself seems to bend around them. Air thickens with the weight of expectation, or perhaps it is the warp bleeding through the thin veil separating worlds. Every sound is amplified, the crackle of incense, the hiss of molten promethium, the whispered liturgies recited by unseen voices. The aspirant feels the eyes of entities older than stars upon them, the gaze of patrons and rivals alike, each measuring the depth of ambition and the resilience of will. Nothing is ordinary here, every motion, every breath is charged with significance, and even the smallest hesitation is magnified into potential annihilation. The final rites are both intimate and cataclysmic. Aspirants are immersed in the raw currents of the warp, sometimes through trance, sometimes through psychic channeling, and sometimes through the literal offering of their blood, their flesh, or even their memories. Within these crucibles, time fractures. Minutes may stretch into centuries, centuries collapse into moments. They confront themselves, every fear, every regret, every desire they have ever buried is brought forth, sharpened, and twisted into instruments of transformation. To endure is to embrace not only power but the totality of one's being, including the parts they once despised. Those who falter find their essence torn apart, scattered into the currents of the immaterium, leaving no trace but a faint echo of ambition. In these rites, the mortal's body is reshaped alongside the soul. Limbs may lengthen or warp, veins pulse with unnatural ichor, and eyes gleam with the light of distant stars. Some aspirants feel their very bones hum, resonating with the subtle music of the warp, as though they are instruments attuned to a symphony no human ear was meant to perceive. The sensations are both exquisite and excruciating, pleasure intertwined with pain, understanding interwoven with terror. Every transformation is precise, deliberate, and impossible to reverse. Humanity recedes like a tide, leaving in its wake the faint outline of something new, something monstrous, something divine. The interaction with demonic patrons intensifies at this stage. Beings of unimaginable power manifest fully in the rituals, no longer distant whispers but immediate, overwhelming presences. They test the mortal with visions that blend beauty and horror, commands that twist logic and morality, and temptations that challenge the very essence of identity. Some aspirants are seduced by the promise of absolute dominion, others are terrified into obedience. The balance between ambition and survival is razor-thin. Those who fail are never forgotten, they are catalogued in the annals of the gods as cautionary examples, their existence a warning to those who dare tread the same path. Yet even as the aspirant suffers, there is clarity. In the eye of this storm, amidst pain, fear, and the overwhelming weight of cosmic scrutiny, they feel their destiny unfold. They are no longer mere mortals, they are vessels, chosen for a purpose that stretches beyond the comprehension of humanity. Every thought, every memory, every sensation is now a tool for their eventual ascension. The rituals have done more than test, they have prepared, honed, and broken the mortal, readying them for the final journey into the heart of the warp. When the last incantation fades and the final sacrifice is complete, silence reigns. The sanctum, once alive with fire, chanting, and the hum of promethium, now holds only a tense expectancy. The aspirant stands transformed in ways imperceptible to human eyes yet obvious to those who dwell in the immaterium. Their heart may still beat, their lungs may still draw air, but their mind has begun to echo with the rhythms of something older, more immense, and infinitely more dangerous. The stage is set. The mortal is ready to leave the material world behind and take the first step into true power, the step that will determine whether they rise to the rank of Daemon Prince or are lost to oblivion, consumed by the very forces they sought to command. The path forward is clear, yet perilous. The rituals have stripped away weakness, sharpened desire, and aligned ambition with cosmic currents beyond reckoning. The mortal's journey is far from over. What lies ahead is the uncharted expanse of the immaterium, the testing grounds of godhood itself, where survival is a victory and power is the only currency. The moment of ascension approaches, and with it, the mortal edges ever closer to a transformation that will unmake them, remake them, and place them forever among the ranks of those whose names are feared across the galaxy, the Daemon Princes. The immaterium is unlike any place the mortal has ever known, though they have glimpsed its echoes in dreams, rituals, and the visions granted by their patrons. The moment they step beyond the veil of reality, the familiar rules of space and time fracture. Stars fold upon themselves, forming impossible geometries, worlds twist and stretch into landscapes that defy comprehension. Light is a memory here, and sound carries the weight of thought itself. Even the air, or whatever passes for it in this realm, presses against the skin, filled with whispers that claw at the mind. For the newly ascended aspirant, the first step into the warp is a baptism by chaos, an immersion into a reality that is both alive and indifferent, hostile and seductive. The initial sensation is disorientation. A mortal mind clinging to the laws of the material universe is ill-equipped for this place. Horizons collapse into infinite spirals, and time loops unpredictably, forcing the traveler to confront visions of both past failures and potential futures. Some experience déjà vu so complete it becomes indistinguishable from reality, others see themselves reflected in forms they cannot recognize, twisted into grotesque parodies of humanity. The warp is both mirror and crucible, reflecting the deepest fears and desires of the soul while testing resilience, will, and ambition. The aspirant must learn quickly, hesitation is fatal, and misjudgment can lead to annihilation or worse, a permanent binding to the chaos that surges around them. Power comes quickly, though never without consequence. The chaos gods, now intimately aware of the mortal's presence, press their influence upon the aspirant. Subtle at first, this touch grows insistent, reshaping perception and bending instinct. They feel energy coursing through them like liquid fire, a symphony of potential that tingles in every nerve. Their senses expand beyond flesh, detecting the pulsing life of distant worlds, the whispers of demons circling unseen, the ebb and flow of currents within the warp itself. It is intoxicating, frightening, and addictive. And yet, the mortal knows that such power is fragile, a moment of arrogance, a lapse of focus, and the very currents that grant life could just as easily consume it. The first trials are merciless. Beings of the immaterium, both minor demons and ancient patrons, test the aspirant relentlessly. Some attack in forms of incomprehensible geometry, others in shapes drawn from the mortal's own psyche, wielding their fears like weapons. Each encounter forces the aspirant to adapt, to balance aggression with caution, intuition with reason. Every success strengthens them, every failure leaves an imprint on the soul. And yet, even victory is bittersweet. The warp does not reward innocence or morality, only those willing to embrace the full scope of their ambition, cruelty, and cunning. In these initial steps, the mortal begins to understand the duality of their existence. They are still human in form, yet already something more. Thoughts move faster than speech, reflexes are honed beyond natural limits. Their perception of the immaterium continues to deepen, they can see the faint outlines of demons, detect the subtle pull of currents around astral objects, and sense the attention of gods who regard them as potential champions. It is a heady, perilous intoxication, a seduction of power that is impossible to resist. And yet, even as they are elevated, fragments of their humanity, fear, doubt, memory, cling stubbornly, creating a tension that will never fully disappear. The aspirant also encounters other entities within the warp, some friendly, some hostile, and some ambiguous. Echoes of other mortals who have attempted ascension may appear, whispering guidance, threats, or riddles. Some are reflections of the self, projections of fear or desire, designed to test perception and will. Others are emissaries of the chaos gods, subtle and insidious, shaping the path ahead with promises of dominion, eternal life, or vengeance. Every interaction carries meaning, yet none are easily understood. The aspirant must rely on intuition, cunning, and resolve, for misjudgment can shatter both body and soul. By the end of these first encounters, the aspirant realizes the immaterium is not merely a place, but a force, fluid, alive, and willful. It does not simply host them, it tests them, reshapes them, and demands their attention in every instant. The first step into this reality is both a gift and a curse. Power flows in abundance, yet it is entwined with danger at every turn. Those who endure begin to shed the last vestiges of their purely mortal self, stepping closer to the status of Daemon Prince, yet understanding that survival alone is insufficient. Mastery, cunning, and unflinching ambition will be required for the next trials, deeper and darker than any the aspirant has yet faced. The aspirant quickly learns that the immaterium does not tolerate weakness, hesitation, or naivete. Every step they take resonates like a ripple through unseen currents, attracting attention both benevolent and malignant. Minor demons circle like predators, testing defenses, probing weaknesses, and occasionally offering cryptic guidance. Each encounter is a lesson in survival, to read the currents, to anticipate attacks that are impossible in the material world, and to trust instincts that feel both alien and unervingly precise. Time and space lose their ordinary meaning. The aspirant experiences moments where a single heartbeat stretches into centuries, where a thought can reverberate across galaxies, yet simultaneously feels as ephemeral as smoke. It is dizzying, intoxicating, and terrifying in equal measure. With each challenge, power grows, but so too does risk. The warp is not a neutral medium, it is sentient in its chaos, attentive, and judgmental in ways that mortals can barely comprehend. Gifts are entwined with tests. A sudden burst of psychic energy may fortify the body and mind, yet it may also leave residual scars, both physical and spiritual, that hint at the cost of unearned power. Those who are overly ambitious, eager to claim every fragment of might, often falter, overreaching and leaving themselves vulnerable to the predations of the immaterium. Subtlety, patience, and restraint become as vital as raw strength, and the aspirant must learn to balance desire with calculation, hunger with wisdom, and power with survival. The presence of the gods becomes palpable during these trials. They are not passive observers, they whisper through the edges of perception, hinting at knowledge, guiding through visions, and sometimes issuing challenges that strain the mortal mind to breaking. Some aspirants experience these as dreams while awake, an unending series of omens and portents that seem both impossibly urgent and indecipherably cryptic. Others encounter beings in forms that shift with thought itself, massive, impossible, terrifying, yet simultaneously inspiring reverence. These encounters are lessons. To fail is to be consumed, to succeed is to gain the fragile favor of forces that dwell outside the material universe. The mortal begins to understand that ascension is not simply a matter of endurance but of adaptation. The immaterium reshapes reality around intention and belief. What the aspirant perceives, fears, and desires manifests tangibly, bending the currents of the warp to reflect the inner landscape of the mind. This is both a blessing and a hazard. The mind must be disciplined, the soul fortified, or the self risks being torn apart by its own projections. Aspirants are tested not only physically and psychically but spiritually. They confront memories, regrets, and desires made manifest as entities and obstacles. Each confrontation is a negotiation between fear and ambition, self-preservation and the promise of immortality. As the first trials continue, the aspirant senses the subtle encroachment of transformation. The body remains flesh, yet it is already altered by the currents of the warp. Reflexes are sharpened, senses heightened beyond human norms, and the very perception of reality begins to bend. Thought flows faster than speech, and instincts respond in ways that defy mortal understanding. Dreams merge with waking life, visions bleed into perception, and the boundary between self and universe begins to dissolve. The mortal is learning the first lessons of godhood, that power is inseparable from danger, and that the line between mastery and annihilation is invisible until crossed. Yet even amid these trials, fragments of humanity cling stubbornly, tethering the aspirant to a world that is no longer fully theirs. Memories of home, faces of comrades, faint remnants of compassion and doubt linger in the corners of thought. They are not weaknesses but instruments of choice. The aspirant must decide whether to hold these fragments, to let them guide and temper ambition, or to cast them away entirely in pursuit of pure power. Each choice leaves an imprint on the soul, shaping not only the path to ascension but the form the eventual Daemon Prince will take. By the end of this phase, the aspirant has survived the initial onslaught of the immaterium. They are changed irrevocably. What was once human is now something more, an entity that has glimpsed godhood and survived its terrors, that has begun the transformation into a being both feared and revered across the galaxy. Yet the trials of the warp are only beginning. Beyond lies deeper power, greater danger, and the full scope of what it means to become a demon prince. Here, survival is no longer enough, mastery, cunning, and ambition must guide every step. The immaterium watches, and the gods wait, as the mortal moves toward the next stage of transformation, forever on the knife's edge between mortality and divinity. The deeper the aspirant ventures, the more the immaterium reveals itself not as a place, but as a crucible of consciousness. It tests not only strength, but the very essence of self, probing for cracks in resolve and gaps in ambition. Reality bends and folds, worlds exist simultaneously and impossibly, bleeding into one another, populated by visions both familiar and alien. The aspirant confronts echoes of mortality, scenes of death, betrayal, and despair, but these are refracted through the lens of power, magnified and twisted. To endure is to accept both fear and exhilaration as equal partners, to learn that the terror of annihilation and the intoxication of dominion are inseparable in this realm. The first demonic allies or adversaries encountered are as instructive as they are terrifying. A minor demon might take the form of a lost comrade, whispering promises of knowledge or immortality, only to vanish into the shadows when the aspirant reaches for it. A more powerful entity may loom in impossible forms, limbs where none should exist, eyes that see beyond time, voices that echo in thought rather than sound. These beings are neither kind nor cruel, they exist to probe, to teach, and to test. Interaction is a careful dance, arrogance invites destruction, hesitation invites madness, and insight opens pathways to influence and power. Every action, every choice is a measurement of the aspirant's readiness to ascend beyond mortality. The warp itself becomes a teacher. Currents swirl around the aspirant, subtle at first, guiding, warning, and occasionally punishing. They learn to feel the flow, to anticipate the tides of energy that can either elevate or consume. Even sensation becomes a tool, the way the air bends around a vision, the vibration in the very fabric of reality, the whispering of distant minds, all communicate lessons in survival and mastery. Those who ignore these signals, who rely solely on physical skill or mortal cunning, find themselves lost, consumed, or warped into something unrecognizable. Adaptation is the only path forward. Within this chaos, the aspirant also begins to perceive the structure of power itself. Hierarchies of demonic entities, the attention of gods, and the subtle currents connecting mortal ambition to divine influence become tangible. The warp is not random, it is a living reflection of will, intent, and desire. Those who can read its patterns gain advantage, those who cannot are prey. Some aspirants speak of seeing faint outlines of the great demon princes, remnants of their influence pulsing through the currents like faint stars in a storm. To glimpse such beings is both a warning and an inspiration, a promise of what might be achieved, and a reminder of the price of failure. Even as power grows, the mortal must confront the persistence of self. Fragments of humanity linger, doubt, compassion, fleeting morality. These can guide or hinder, depending on the aspirant's choices. Some embrace them, using them to temper ambition and anchor themselves against the seduction of chaos. Others cast them aside, surrendering fully to the warp, letting the gods reshape identity according to need and potential. Each choice leaves permanent marks upon the soul, influencing the form and temperament of the demon prince that may one day emerge. The final moments of this stage are marked by a clarity that is both beautiful and horrifying. The aspirant perceives themselves simultaneously as mortal and as something more. Their senses extend into the currents of the warp, their thoughts intertwine with energies far beyond comprehension, and yet a memory of human weakness remains as a fragile echo. It is a liminal state, a threshold between worlds, where the mortal is acutely aware of the price of ascension, the breadth of potential power, and the relentless scrutiny of gods both unseen and omnipresent. Here, survival alone is insufficient, the aspirant must act, must shape their destiny, and must embrace transformation in its totality. By the end of this first immersion, the aspirant has endured the initial horrors, claimed fleeting mastery over currents and entities, and begun to transcend the limitations of the flesh. They are no longer entirely human, yet they have not fully become a demon prince. The path stretches forward, darker, deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. Beyond lies the realm where power becomes dominion, and dominion demands sacrifice that the mortal mind can scarcely imagine. The immaterium watches, the gods whisper, and the mortal prepares for trials that will define not only their existence, but their very place in the cosmos. The boundaries of the immaterium blur completely as the aspirant moves deeper into its currents. Here, there is no fixed horizon, no sense of gravity or solidity, only the endless flow of raw power and the constant whisper of entities whose eyes see beyond the span of millennia. Time, as it had once been understood, is meaningless. Days, years, and centuries fold into one another in a ceaseless, dizzying loop. The mortal feels simultaneously infinitesimal and infinite, aware of the fragility of flesh yet certain of the immensity of potential. Every thought pulses with energy, every desire reverberates across the currents, and every hesitation risks annihilation, or worse, permanent subjugation to forces they sought to command. In this expanse, the aspirant encounters the first true manifestations of godly power beyond mortal comprehension. Vast forms drift through the currents, neither wholly material nor fully immaterial, radiating authority and menace. Their presence is felt before it is seen, a weight upon the mind, a tug upon the soul, a vibration in the very marrow of perception. To observe these beings is to grasp, fleetingly, the scale of what awaits those who succeed, and the terror reserved for those who fail. Some of these forms are demon princes who have already transcended, their essence woven into the warp itself, their dominion extending across stars and astral currents. Others are lesser entities, emissaries of the gods, whose tasks are to test, corrupt, and manipulate. Power in the warp is not freely given. It must be earned, wrested from the currents through acts of will, cunning, and sacrifice. The mortal learns quickly that dominance is never total, it is a negotiation, a constant balancing act between ambition and endurance. Every decision has weight, a single miscalculation may result in physical destruction, psychic shattering, or spiritual consumption. The aspirant must anticipate threats that exist beyond human logic, feel currents invisible to any eye, and navigate entities whose thought processes span eons. Mastery is not a single achievement but an ongoing, relentless struggle against forces that are both seductive and lethal. Amidst this, the aspirant begins to sense the patterns that govern existence beyond the material universe. Currents of power weave through the warp, connecting mortal ambition, divine will, and the ebb and flow of stars and empires. The whispers of the gods grow clearer, sometimes instruction, sometimes temptation, sometimes challenge. Some mortals succumb entirely, bending to the godly influence, losing themselves in the promise of dominion. Others resist, carving their own paths through the chaos, harnessing the raw energy of the warp without surrendering wholly to it. Each choice shapes the soul, defining the trajectory of potential ascension and the form that eventual demonhood will take. The first acts of true godly creation become possible here. Aspirants can shape the currents around them, bending reality to the outline of thought, forging constructs of will and power that exist temporarily yet demonstrate mastery over the warp's chaos. These acts are perilous, one misstep can consume the mortal entirely, yet they are intoxicating glimpses of what it means to wield power beyond flesh. The sense of control is absolute and fleeting, reminding the aspirant that true authority in the warp is earned in moments of audacity, cunning, and endurance. Every creation, every manipulation, leaves an indelible imprint on both the mortal and the currents themselves. Even amid burgeoning power, the mortal must contend with the lingering shadow of mortality. Doubt, fear, and fleeting morality persist, sometimes as memories, sometimes as apparitions. They can guide, mislead, or torment, depending on how the aspirant interacts with them. Those who suppress all vestiges of humanity too harshly risk becoming hollow, their ambition unchecked but brittle. Those who cling too tightly to memory risk hesitation, vulnerability, and collapse under the scrutiny of the immaterium. Balance is everything, a tension that must be maintained even as the aspirant's perception, reflexes, and instincts expand beyond all human measure. By the end of these initial steps into power beyond mortality, the aspirant has become something entirely new. They are no longer merely mortal, they are a being of immense potential, already resonating with the energy that will one day make them a demon prince. The immaterium has tested them, shaped them, and revealed both the limits of flesh and the possibilities of the soul. Yet even as power courses through every thought and action, the aspirant knows the path ahead is darker, more demanding, and infinitely more dangerous. The gods watch still, currents swirl endlessly, and the trials that remain will demand not only skill and will, but the full surrender of all that the mortal once was. The deeper the aspirant sinks into the currents of the warp, the more tangible the presence of the chaos gods becomes. Their influence is no longer subtle, it presses against the mind like a tidal wave of thought, feeling, and intent. Whispers evolve into visions, visions into demands, and the mortal begins to perceive the immensity of power that awaits those who endure. Yet this power is not granted freely. Every moment spent in the immaterium is a negotiation of will, a constant contest between the aspirant's ambition and the judgment of entities older than the stars themselves. The slightest hesitation, the faintest flicker of doubt, can become a snare, threatening to unravel centuries of meticulous preparation. Survival in this stage demands more than cunning, it demands the mastery of self. The aspirant learns to bend perception, to manipulate the flow of energy, to anticipate attacks and influence currents in ways that defy mortal understanding. Physicality becomes secondary, thought, instinct, and will take precedence. A movement of the mind can resonate across the warp like a hammer striking an anvil, shifting the balance of entities and energy around them. Power grows with each successful act, yet it is entwined with danger, the warp does not forgive, and any arrogance or misjudgment can unmake even the most prepared soul. Encounters with entities of immense scale and incomprehensible purpose become increasingly frequent. Some are tests of might, others of intellect or perception. An aspirant may face a demon that embodies their deepest fear, another that reflects the darkest ambition within their own heart. These entities are mercurial, one moment hostile, the next instructive, and sometimes both simultaneously. Success demands not merely reaction, but anticipation, creativity, and the ability to perceive patterns in chaos. The aspirant begins to understand that the true measure of power is not raw strength, but the ability to manipulate the currents of the warp, to bend entities to purpose, and to navigate the infinite complexity of forces older than the galaxy itself. The mortal also begins to perceive the interplay between material and immaterial power. Events in the physical universe echo faintly in the warp, and actions within the warp resonate back upon reality. A carefully guided thought can shift outcomes in distant battles, influence minds across star systems, or strengthen the foundation of loyal cults. The aspirant senses the threads of fate, the weave of history, and the potential to intervene directly, but with every manipulation comes risk. Overreach can attract attention from rival entities, demonic hunters, or even the subtle scrutiny of other aspirants, whose ambitions overlap and clash in the endless currents. Transformation becomes more than sensation, it is a restructuring of existence. Flesh, mind, and spirit are reconfigured in subtle yet profound ways. Reflexes exceed human limits, perception spans beyond light years, and thought can move with a velocity that rivals the currents themselves. Memory and identity become tools, sharpened into weapons of insight and strategy. The aspirant begins to understand that mortality is a limitation, not a virtue, and that the shedding of human frailty is not only necessary, it is the first step toward true immortality. Even amid this extraordinary evolution, the aspirant must contend with lingering echoes of humanity. Doubts, fleeting morality, and remnants of compassion may persist, either as anchors or hindrances. Some mortals embrace them, using fragments of their past selves as guides and constraints. Others discard them completely, surrendering entirely to the currents, reshaping the self into a being optimized for power and survival. Every choice leaves an indelible mark on the soul, shaping not only immediate capabilities but the very form and temperament of the demon prince they are destined to become. By the close of this stage, the aspirant has moved beyond mortal understanding. They exist in a state of heightened perception and power, attuned to the currents, entities, and subtle whispers that govern the immaterium. Yet even as they stand at the threshold of godhood, the challenges ahead loom larger and darker than any faced before. The immaterium watches, the gods test, and the aspirant must prepare for trials that will demand the ultimate surrender of the self, or the ultimate assertion of it. Survival is no longer enough, mastery, cunning, and ambition must shape every action, thought, and decision as the mortal steps ever closer to true ascension. As the aspirant advances further into the immaterium, the boundaries between self and environment dissolve entirely. The currents no longer merely surround them, they become an extension of thought, intent, and desire. The mortal discovers that the warp responds to conviction as much as action, bending subtly to the patterns of will and ambition. A single thought, a sharp intention, can ripple through the currents, reshaping landscapes of the immaterial, redirecting demonic attention, or even influencing distant events in the material universe. Power is no longer a gift, it is a dialogue, a negotiation of presence, cunning, and perception, and the aspirant must learn to speak fluently in the language of the gods themselves. It is here, at this level of immersion, that the aspirant first glimpses the ranks of demon princes as more than legend. They are not merely beings of destructive force, they are architects of the warp, entities whose ambitions have become intertwined with reality itself. Their presence is felt before it is seen, a weight upon the currents, a resonance in the very structure of thought. For the aspirant, these glimpses serve as both inspiration and warning. To attain such power is to survive trials that stretch beyond morality, endurance, and sanity. Yet the potential is undeniable, these figures are living proof of what the relentless pursuit of ambition, cunning, and devotion to the gods can produce. The first true mastery of self within the warp is agonizing in its precision. The aspirant's body is reshaped subtly but irrevocably, muscles, nerves, and senses attuned to the currents, veins pulse with energy, eyes see not only the material but the currents beyond it, and reflexes extend beyond the natural limits of flesh. Yet this is only the beginning. The soul is the crucible, and in the immaterium, the soul is both weapon and battleground. Every act of dominance, every decision to exert will over the currents, strengthens the aspirant, but every hesitation or doubt leaves a scar. They begin to understand the fragile balance between expansion and collapse, between influence and annihilation, and that the line between mastery and destruction is invisible until crossed. Encounters with entities of immense scale, both allies and adversaries, accelerate the transformation. Some take forms that inspire awe, with impossible geometry and presence that conveys both age and omnipotence. Others reflect the mortal's own fears and ambitions, a mirror in which flaws, desires, and potential are magnified beyond comprehension. Each interaction demands not only strategy but psychological acumen. To misinterpret even a gesture can result in destruction, to succeed, even partially, brings insight and favor. The aspirant begins to navigate these encounters not as a mortal reacting, but as a being capable of manipulating both the physical and metaphysical consequences of action. Yet, even at this level, remnants of mortality persist, subtle but persistent. Memories, fleeting morality, hesitation, they can both temper ambition and threaten mastery. Some aspirants channel these fragments into discipline, using them as anchors against the seduction of absolute power. Others cast them aside, surrendering fully to the currents and embracing transformation as both inevitable and necessary. These decisions are never trivial, they define not only the mortal's survival in the warp, but the form, temperament, and essence of the demon prince they are becoming. The choice between restraint and surrender echoes through every act, shaping destiny in ways that cannot be undone. By the end of this stage, the aspirant has evolved into something unrecognizable to ordinary mortals. They are a being of perception and power, attuned to currents, whispers, and entities that govern existence beyond the material. They have begun to harness influence, bend energy, and anticipate the movements of gods and demons alike. Yet the path ahead remains perilous, darker, and more demanding than any trial faced before. True ascension requires not only survival, but the courage to assert dominance over the warp itself and over the mortal instincts that still cling stubbornly to the soul. The aspirant stands poised on the precipice of godhood, ready to take the next step into the final crucible that will decide whether they become a demon prince, or are consumed entirely. The moment of ultimate transformation is neither sudden nor entirely perceptible. It begins as a tremor in the soul, a shifting of perception so subtle that the aspirant feels only a slight imbalance at first. Then comes the flood, the currents of the warp press in from every direction, overwhelming the senses, bending reality, and stretching consciousness beyond any previous limits. Time ceases to exist as the mortal once understood it, thought and action merge into a seamless stream of perception. The crucible does not merely test the body or the mind, it lays bare the entirety of the soul, exposing ambition, fear, desire, and doubt to the scrutiny of entities that have existed since before the birth of stars. The first phase of the crucible is confrontation. Visions of past failures, betrayals, and moral compromise assail the aspirant, but these are intensified, magnified, and refracted through the lens of the warp. Every hesitation, every lingering shred of compassion or doubt, is twisted into a trial, each more harrowing than the last. The mortal must confront these fragments not as memories, but as living forces seeking to unmake them. Survival depends not on avoidance but on full acknowledgement and mastery. The aspirant realizes that power beyond mortality demands an embrace of all facets of self, including those most reviled or feared. The soul is both weapon and battlefield, and the currents of the immaterium will exploit any weakness without mercy. Entities of godly scale loom ever closer, their presence felt as a gravitational force on thought and spirit. They observe, test, and occasionally intervene, not as judges, but as instruments of fate, guiding the aspirant through the crucible with subtle nudges, challenges, and sometimes threats. Some manifest as impossibly vast beings, dripping with energy and authority, while others appear as intimate, personal reflections of ambition, desire, or fear. Communication is rarely verbal, it is an exchange of essence, intent, and resonance. The mortal must respond with equal subtlety and precision, for misstep is annihilation, and success is measured not in survival alone, but in the transformation of self. The aspirant begins to perceive the mechanics of ascension itself. The warp is not chaotic in the sense that mortals understand, it is responsive, a living reflection of intent, ambition, and the flow of power. Currents align with thought and will, but only when these are honed to perfection. Each manipulation, each act of control over the immaterium, is both a test and a declaration. The aspirant must balance aggression with patience, ambition with insight, and desire with discipline. One false move risks unraveling centuries of preparation, one bold, precise action may cement the path to godhood. Physical transformation becomes evident at this stage, though it is intertwined with psychic and spiritual evolution. Flesh and blood are reshaped subtly at first, eyes gleam with unnatural awareness, veins pulse with warp energy, and reflexes exceed mortal capacity. But the true transformation is of essence, thought, perception, and will expand, intertwining with the currents themselves. The aspirant senses the echoes of Daemon Princes past and present, feels the weight of their dominion, and glimpses the outlines of the forms they might yet assume. Each step through the crucible cements the separation from humanity while imbuing the mortal with a fragment of godly permanence. Even as the aspirant reaches the apex of these trials, remnants of humanity linger in shadowed corners of the mind. Memories, fleeting morality, the faint tug of fear or compassion, all remain as both hindrance and guide. Some choose to retain them, using the fragments of their mortal selves to temper power and direct ambition. Others surrender completely, allowing the warp to reshape them into an entity optimized for survival, dominion, and influence. The choice is irreversible, defining the essence, temperament, and form of the Daemon Prince that will emerge. By the conclusion of this first part of the crucible, the mortal is no longer merely mortal. They exist as a nexus of perception, will, and power, their soul intertwined with the currents of the warp, their mind expanded to perceive threats, opportunities, and entities beyond human understanding. They are poised on the final edge, the threshold between mortality and godhood, aware that the next stages will demand not only endurance and cunning, but absolute mastery over self, over desire, and over the immaterial forces that will define their existence for eternity. The crucible has begun in earnest, and nothing that follows will allow retreat. The crucible deepens, and the aspirant's perception fractures into dimensions beyond comprehension. The warp presses upon the soul from all sides, bending thought and feeling into forms that defy understanding. Each heartbeat, or the semblance of one, carries the weight of eons, echoing with the resonance of the gods themselves. Here, mortality is an echo, a memory to be either discarded or weaponized, and the aspirant confronts the truth that all that remains human is fleeting. Time stretches, contracts, and folds, forcing the mind to navigate labyrinths of past and potential futures simultaneously. Every choice becomes a pivot of existence, each decision resonating across currents, shaping possibilities and consequences in ways impossible to predict. The first true challenge is dominance over the currents themselves. Raw power courses around, through, and into the aspirant, both exhilarating and perilous. The warp does not merely surround them, it seeks to test their will, probing for hesitation, weakness, or doubt. Some currents whisper secrets of creation, others roar with annihilation. The aspirant learns quickly that influence must be asserted with precision. A misalignment can tear the soul asunder, a misjudgment can reverse centuries of progress. Success is not measured by survival alone but by the ability to shape the immaterium, bending it subtly yet irrevocably to the aspirant's intent. Entities of unimaginable scale appear frequently, neither wholly hostile nor wholly friendly. Some resemble twisted reflections of mortality, others loom as vast, incomprehensible presences, radiating authority and menace. Interaction is a dangerous dance. The aspirant must interpret the meaning of forms, gestures, and currents, responding with a combination of intuition, cunning, and sheer force of will. To falter is to be consumed, but to succeed is to gain insight, resonance, and the faint favor of powers that operate on scales beyond human comprehension. Every encounter leaves a permanent imprint on the mind and soul, shaping the aspirant into a being capable of one day claiming a Daemon Prince's mantle. Transformation becomes increasingly tangible. Flesh and blood adapt to the currents, veins glow faintly with ichor, muscles tense with unnatural strength, and senses extend into realms unseen. The mind stretches to perceive patterns, detect currents, and sense entities across vast distances, both in the warp and in the material universe. Memory, instinct, and morality are reconfigured, tested against ambition and desire, sharpened or discarded according to necessity. The aspirant begins to perceive existence as a lattice of power, influence, and consequence, each thread responding to intent and will. Survival demands mastery not only of self but of the forces that bind reality and immateriality alike. The aspirant's humanity flickers intermittently, a shadow against the growing presence of godlike perception. Doubts, fleeting morality, and residual empathy rise and fall like tides, threatening to undermine focus or offering guidance when correctly interpreted. Some mortals embrace these remnants as tools, channeling fragments of their former selves to temper power and achieve clarity. Others cast them aside completely, surrendering to the currents, allowing the warp to sculpt the soul and identity into an entity optimized for influence, dominion, and endurance. Every choice echoes forward, shaping not only the current trial but the future form, temperament, and essence of the Daemon Prince they may yet become. By the midpoint of the crucible, the mortal exists as neither fully human nor fully divine, but as a being suspended between realms, a nexus of perception, will, and raw energy. Power courses through them in waves, thrilling and punishing in equal measure. The immaterium itself seems to pause and consider, testing the limits of intent and ambition, watching as the aspirant edges closer to the point of irreversible transformation. The trials ahead are greater, the stakes higher, and the necessity for mastery absolute. The mortal now teeters on the final precipice, where failure is annihilation, and success is the dawn of eternity. The final phase of the crucible is not a trial of flesh, but of essence. The aspirant stands at the threshold between mortality and godhood, a precipice where thought, will, and soul are tested simultaneously. Every vibration of the warp carries scrutiny, every ripple of energy reflects potential dominion or destruction. Here, the chaos god's attention is absolute, their influence omnipresent, yet subtle. They do not intervene directly, rather, they observe, adjust currents, and allow the mortal to act, to assert dominion over self and environment alike. It is the ultimate test, to survive, to master, and to impose will upon forces older than stars, all without losing the spark of ambition that brought the aspirant here. The mortal feels the full weight of transformation as boundaries between mind, body, and warp dissolve. Flesh and blood no longer constrain thought, the soul pulses with currents of power that resonate across the immaterium. Visions of potential futures, of rival aspirants, of worlds they could influence, flash simultaneously, overlapping in dizzying patterns. Every choice, every assertion of will, shapes these outcomes. Failure is catastrophic, not merely death, but the total unmaking of self, leaving only echoes of ambition scattered across the currents. Success is no less absolute, it grants a foothold in the hierarchy of godhood, a place among the entities whose influence echoes through galaxies and through time itself. In this state, the aspirant confronts the most profound reflection, their own nature. Fragments of humanity cling as shadows, whispering of doubt, fear, and morality. The decision is final and irrevocable. To cling too tightly is to risk hesitation and collapse, to surrender completely is to embrace power without restraint, to accept dominion and corruption as inseparable. Some mortals temper their ambition with these remnants, achieving balance and calculated influence. Others discard them utterly, allowing the warp to craft an entity optimized for absolute authority, devoid of hesitation, fully aligned with the currents of chaos and the favor of the gods. This choice defines the essence, temperament, and form of the Daemon Prince they will become. The final confrontation of the crucible often comes in the form of entities of godly scale, embodiments of chaos itself, or manifestations of the aspirant's own ambition and fear. Some take shapes of unimaginable complexity, their forms defying geometry, their intentions spanning eons. Others are subtle, whispering guidance or threat in a language of intent and resonance rather than sound. Interaction is perilous, each response, hesitation, or assertion is a declaration of will. Only those capable of perceiving the currents, anticipating reaction, and acting with absolute precision survive unscathed, gaining insight, favor, and an initial foothold in immortality. When the crucible concludes, the mortal emerges as something new. Flesh and blood remain, but they are vessels of power, resonating with the currents of the warp. Mind and soul are expanded beyond human limits, attuned to patterns of influence, authority, and energy that shape the galaxy in subtle but profound ways. The aspirant has survived what no ordinary mortal could endure, mastered the currents, and asserted dominion over forces that would unmake lesser beings. They are now primed for the final transformation into a Daemon Prince, their form and essence shaped by choice, trial, and ambition. Even at this apex, the immaterium is both ally and adversary. Power flows abundantly, yet it is not without cost. The mortal knows that the next stage, true ascension, is not simply a reward but a continuation of trials on a scale beyond comprehension. Every thought, every desire, and every act will resonate eternally, binding them ever more deeply to the currents and to the godly hierarchy that has already begun to claim them. Mortality is shed, ambition is sharpened, and the aspirant steps forward, poised to cross the final threshold. The universe itself seems to hold its breath as the mortal prepares to embrace the ultimate power, existence as a Daemon Prince, a being of chaos, ambition, and immortal influence.